always forget. There we go. Aswin, have you been to one of these before? Do you want to introduce yourself?
No, this is my first time to these meetings. Actually, I am one of the I'm in LFX. I am the LFX mentee for this year. So Joe Kotner is my mentor.
Awesome, great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Next thing on the agenda is release planning and updates. I think Emily is not going to be able to make this one. Javier, do you want to cover from platform side, and then maybe Natalie could take implementation?
Yeah, all right. So let's see. The Tecton stuff is still in limbo, waiting for approval from the Tecton catalog. So still poking them there. Pack, we are anticipating to release next week. Dan Thornton will be our release manager, so he should be taking care of that. We are trying to go into feature complete either today or tomorrow. There's a couple issues, in particular bugs that we want to address before we seal it off. But other than that, everything seems to be going according to schedule.
On the lifecycle side, I think we are getting close to shipping our next, I guess it would be 0.11.0. We had talked about shipping a patch 0.10.3, but I'm not sure if we indeed will, because the other releases might be around the same time. So, that's it.
Awesome. Any other release planning updates? Anything around the registry or docs or anything?
I don't think there's anything from either of those I know of.
Cool. So then we'll jump into our weekly RFC review. Give me a second to share the screen. All right, first thing is process-specific working directory. This is new. Forrest, open this. Is he here? Don't think. Oh, yeah, cool, awesome. You're in the corner.
Yeah, no, I think the RFC title is relatively explanatory. I think it would make sense for you to be able to specify what working directory you wanted for a given process. I know I opened this yesterday, so I might just give everyone some time to read it and take a look into it.
Does that mean you don't want to put it on the agenda for today, or
I can put it on the agenda for today.
Sounds good. Seems like there's some background noise on your side, Forrest. Thank you. Next RFC is guidelines for accepting component level contributions. This one is mine, and I just put it on the agenda, and we can talk about it today too. One after that is RFC for displaying contributor graph.
Yeah, this was mine. It's exactly what it sounds like. I want to put a graph somewhere public. I will talk about it more in the agenda.
Awesome. If you want to put it at the end, that'd be great. Next one is RFC on issue generation.
Same thing, add it to the agenda if we could get to it, but not pressing. If anybody could review that, I know Joe approved it, so it'd be nice to get some discussion there.
Sounds good. Am I supposed to be adding labels to these? Did we say that's not part of the process?
Yeah, I think so.
During the review part. So let's just go back through and this is Buildpack API, right? Just would require a Buildpack spec change, and it's in the
implementation.
Yeah, where's that implementation team here? And any other labels supposed to add at this point? I think it's just those two, right? And then cool. And then component level contributions. This is just core. And do we have a good governance thing?
I don't think so. There aren't a lot of governance RFCs.
Yeah, all right. Let's just say core for that one. And then contributor graph, this is learning. Is that right?
Sure, feels good.
Cool. Too many labels here. Learning, and then not a spec thing there. All right, and then next thing. Sorry, did we talk about issue generation? Yes, we did.
Yeah.
Right. Project descriptor domains RFC.
Does this need to be labeled still?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm mostly just looking for, at least we did a lot of discussion last week. I'm mostly looking for feedback on still kind of the open thing that Joe commented on, but like the project TLD and how we're squatting on that and kind of where people sit on what we want to do with that before I kind of move forward.
Got it. So not on the agenda, just looking for feedback asynchronously.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about it, but I think we have a full agenda here.
Sounds good. And how would you categorize this? I forget.
This would be a platform thing, and then there should be an extension.
Talked about the project descriptor being more on the implementation side, I guess. But I could say platform for now.
Yeah, I don't think we've moved it officially into the implementation side of things. I don't think anything on the implementation side reads project descriptor.
Okay, yeah, we got this extensions one there. Cool. All right. Pack as a draft. Add builder key in project descriptor RFC proposal. This is in FCP. I think we're still waiting on image or on some issues to get created. Yep. Guess Javier, does anything need to get?
No, yeah, I just need to get that done at least for learning and platform.
Sounds good.
I had a quick question about I guess process here. So a bunch of issues will be created for that RFC. If I want to express that I would love to see this implemented faster, where's the right place to say hey, can the CNB project prioritize this?
I would comment in the RFC and volunteer to start kind of doing the work to get it, moving forward. Like if you wanted to create issues, if issues need to get created, that I think doesn't have to be the person assigned to look at the RFC. Also just voicing your support in the RFC would be good too.
Got it. Okay.
I don't know if that's we don't have a great process answer for that question. Just my advice. Cool. Next thing is create Stackify repo. The status of this. Do we have Marty here?
Aren't we done with this?
Yeah. So I think
we're just waiting on Emily.
Waiting on issues being created.
Do we need issues for the implementation side of things?
I believe so, right?
Is this an implementation?
Oh wait, it's just platform.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I thought it was platform.
So this is probably ready to go.
I think so. I think we still want those issues created label, for somebody to speak on behalf of the implementation side, but I think we're good.
Cool. I'll let Emily know that this is ready to go to add those labels. And then application mixins is still a draft. And so that concludes our RFC review. Next thing on the agenda is process specific, component guidelines. I just didn't link it to the RFC. So this is, and I'll put the link in the document for people to click on too. For this, I am proposing some guidelines for what it would look like for the project to accept contributions like Stackify was an example of like repo that was being contributed kind of externally into the project as opposed to some lines of code in an existing repo. I can just, let me share my screen. That'd probably be the easiest way. Cool, everybody see that? I think Joe already had some feedback on this, but the idea here is just, we don't really have a process for accepting larger things than, individual contributions to the repos that exist. So it came up recently that it'd be good to talk or to have guidelines for what is acceptable and not acceptable to, donate into the project or to be contributed to the project for that type of component. Take a look and see what you think. Just give some examples of what things that could be contributed and couldn't be contributed might look like. Give folks a minute to read that. See if there are any questions.
So I have a question for the non-qualifying example there on the generic CI/CD tool. What is that speaking to and to what level? Because we do have the Tecton tasks. Are you talking about Tecton as a whole as opposed to individual pieces or integration pieces?
Yeah, you couldn't contribute all of something that's all of Tecton just because it has some Buildpack building functionality. But you can like an example would be a specific GitHub action that does Buildpack builds that's with the sole intent of supporting integration into that platform would be okay. But a whole CI/CD system that happens to use Buildpacks probably wouldn't belong in the project. It's kind of an obvious statement, but I just wanted to be complete and kind of describing what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Any other questions?
I guess where do we find homes, I guess, for where we would put stuff in? I guess that's part of the proposal.
How would we name the repositories or?
Yeah, if you were bringing something in, who actually owns that piece? How do we determine who owns?
Oh, sub-team ownership of components.
Yeah, sub-team ownership, especially if there might be potentially things that may not fit into our existing sub-teams, maybe.
Yeah, maybe it should say we have to have a plan for maintenance structure around it before it can be accepted.
Yeah, in the RFC, probably.
That's good feedback. I can definitely add that. Anything else?
So it's interesting. It's just what I thought it was describing, but it seems that sounds like it's other open source organizations have project charters or guidelines around what it means to start up a project and a process to go through, including showing that you have buy-in from a community, that it's not a single source that's that's going to do the development in case that company changes. As a change of strategic vision and decides to abandon the component. So they want to see that there's buy-in from more than just one group, which I guess you kind of address a bit with the proposed contribution around people who should abstain from that vote.
Yeah.
But it doesn't directly capture that there's demand for it from more than just that one group.
Got it. I think I like this tries to get at that a little bit, right? Like it has to be something notable, right? But I think you're right in that there should be some item that says, there has to be community consensus that it solves a need that people need solved, and that it would make sense to work together on that. And I could definitely call that out more explicitly.
And the maintenance part, I think that's a good thing to include as well.
Sorry, and the what part?
The maintenance, the discussion just before, like who's going to maintain it? How are they going to maintain it? What does that entail?
Totally. I will definitely add both of those things. Cool. Any other questions or comments? Feedback? All right. Moving on to the next.
So I do have one thing. Is there anything within the CNCF around this that should be either referenced or that we can use as a guideline?
I think there are probably like legal requirements for code that's, belongs to an organization and is now like moving over, right? In the past, when we've like moved projects that were owned by a company into a foundation before, there's some like legal logistical things to deal with there. But I'm not aware of any like, guidelines that sort of sit above that, if that makes sense. Okay. But we can definitely take a look and make sure that that's covered. That's a good point. If CNCF says anything about this, we should definitely get it incorporated. Write that down also.
I think we just ask Service Desk, probably.
That might, if we can't find anything on the TOC repo, that's probably the best path.
Yeah, cool. The contractual part of that is IP assignment and invention assignment. We transferred stuff between organizations, so familiar.
And I know the Eclipse Foundation does a big IP diligence where they look through the history and they make sure that and they actually may ask the contributor to rewrite certain parts that they think impinges on patents or other IP. I'm hoping that CNCF has something to do with that.
Makes sense. Cool. Anything else? All right, we got a number of these, so I'm going to move on to the next one, process-specific working directory.
Yep. You share my screen really quickly. Should be pretty straightforward. Oh, if I can. Otherwise, it's linked right now. I'm having some trouble sharing my screen. 1 second. Why don't you go on to the next item and I'll come back and present this.
Sounds good. So I'll move that below the next one, which is issue generation.
All right. So this has to do with what we spent most of this, beginning of the meeting on, which is these issues, or the fact that we'd like to have issues before an RFC gets merged in, so we could continue to track the work as it progresses through the whole process, right? And I think right now there's this sort of hindrance on two individuals or set of individuals, the maintainers of the individual subgroup subteams that have to, after the fact, after the RFC has been quote unquote approved, go and create the issues. And then the person that's actually merging the approved RFC has to, kind of go and poke those individuals. So that's more or less the motivation for this. We were thinking and discussing of a solution that would allow us to create the issues, or at least create pending issues for RFCs. And then, to tack onto that, to automate that process so that when the RFC itself is merged, it could just essentially create all these pending issues into the appropriate repos. So the proposed solution, there's I believe, 3 proposed solutions. The primary one is based off of adding a section to the RFC template that would essentially kind of negate the user or the initial author from filling it in, but then the maintainers or anybody that reviews the RFC could propose issues to be created onto this section via list in a very specific format. And then it would require the author to accept these suggested changes, right? So there's a mechanism built into GitHub for this. Then, once it gets approved and we kind of merge it through this script that we already use, it would kind of scrape this section for those issues and create the issues in the repositories. That's one solution. The other alternative that I think personally I'm more inclined to push forward on is using comments. So in this case, I think you've all seen kind of like bots on GitHub issues and GitHub PRs, but essentially maintainers or whatnot would be able to add a comment to a particular RFC to add a pending issue to the RFC that then in the similar vein, the RFC script could then go and scrape for those comments and create the issues from.
Does the script do it or does a bot do it?
Since we already used the script, I would assume that the script would do it. We could then, if we want, incorporate the script in some sort of, higher level automation, aka bot, aka GitHub Actions.
So you're proposing the first thing, but you like the comments thing more, even though it's an alternatives?
Yeah. Yes, only because I think the idea of the original author having to accept the suggestions could be more of a burden on them. And, with DCO enabled, it makes it even more complicated of a process. Whereas with the comments, the only downside I could think of is that there's no call to action for maintainers to do this. But then I could think or say that if they don't do this, then, they have to figure out how to do it otherwise.
One thing that you said out loud, but I haven't seen it anywhere in here, is the idea of like a pending issue. What do you mean by creating pending issues versus just standard issues?
Yeah, I think it's a term I'm using to refer to the idea that any comment, let's go with the comment theory here, right? So any comment that has this add issue isn't technically creating an issue immediately. It's simply creating this comment that then this merge RFC script will go in, read through, scrape, and actually create the issues after the fact. And that's why I call it like a pending issue, because technically you could remove an issue by linking to a comment, right? So it's like this influx state before it actually becomes a true GitHub issue.
That makes sense. So issues are real issues after the RFC is merged, but pending
Correct.
Until then. Great.
Yeah, I should probably clarify that if I'm going to use that term, but I don't think I use it in here, just when I describe it. Cool. So that's more or less the proposal. I could let people, kind of think about it, add their opinions on here. What I guess I'd really like to do is get either a vote or buy-in into which one of these two alternatives or options we should really be leaning into.
I have a small question. Does only maintainers can add the add issue thing, or do everyone can do this?
I don't see why other people wouldn't be able to do it, right? I think right now it's a responsibility of the maintainer, but I don't think it's exclusively, up to them.
No, I agree. I just wanted to clarify this. Right. It's a great idea. I love it.
All right, any additional feedback for Javier? Let's move to the next thing on the agenda. Forrest, are you ready?
Appear to be ready.
Sorry.
Can y'all hear me?
Yep, can now.
So yeah, this should be a pretty straightforward discussion, if I can actually manipulate this window any. Cool.
I'm not seeing anything. Are other
Yeah,
people?
I just see a black window.
Me too.
Hold on 1 second. Let me try sharing this again. Oh, cool. It's frozen. It's nifty.
Do you want me to share my screen for us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is my screen actually sharing for y'all?
No.
Other than just a black window?
It just says started screen sharing.
Oh.
Okay, bud. I can do it. Okay. Can we see an RFC now?
Yes, we can.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
Take it away for us.
Yeah, this should be pretty straightforward. I think that some functionality should be added to process types such that you can define the directory that they are, like the process or the command is executed from. I think this would allow users to, or Buildpack authors, I guess, to more easily specify a nested command, or even a user to specify a nested command, even though they are pushing an app directory, they would like to run some sort of binary that they have or something like that that's embedded further down in the application structure. So yeah, I think that that's pretty much it. I think they should be able to do that without having to invoke sort of a change directory command in a shell or something along those lines. So the lifecycle would essentially invoke from the directory given.
I have some feedback and a question.
Sure.
For the name of the key, this is very minor, but command and args feel like normal Docker KC words that you use to describe those things. I think working dir or work dir or something like that, there's probably a convention we could use there to describe the kind of working directory the process starts in that's not as generic as just directory.
Yeah, totally.
I forget what Kate's uses, maybe working -dir in some contexts or something.
I wanted to do working -dir, but I did directory for my initial thing for brevity. I'm willing to go long form if that's acceptable.
Maybe not working -directory, but I think it's okay to abbreviate dir. Yeah.
Whatever.
The next question I had is around the relative path. So this talks about you can do a relative path, to the app, within the app dir. If you created a layer that has your application in it and it needs to be invoked with some subdirectory of the layer, it seems like neither an absolute path nor a relative path from the app directory would be very good at doing that, because if it's absolute, then you have to know what's the layer's is the layers dir really going to be /layers? I don't think we want to encourage people to hard code that into their build pack because it could be different. And then they have to know the build pack ID and the layer, name in there too. It seems a little brittle. But then if it's, relative to the app directory, it's no good way to get there relatively, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would assume that if someone were to build part of their application into a layer, they would put it on the path some way as part of that build process if they needed to access it. So whether that be putting it inside of a bin directory or specifying the layer itself onto the path.
But it doesn't mean that program couldn't, especially if it's not a program that they wrote, right? That program might have working directory requirements where it needs to be run from a layer directory.
Maybe I misunderstood what you were asking about then.
It's like if you wanted to say this process type, that may be in path, right? Maybe contributed in a layers bin directory that may end up in path. But if you wanted to say that its working directory when it runs is also inside of that layer because it's some prepackaged software that the build pack installed that has to run in the context of other things that build pack installed into a layer, right? Do we need a way of, maybe the answer is we can punt on this, doesn't matter right now, but do we need a way of letting you specify that? Because I don't see one with the current interface.
Yeah, could you actually write that down as a form of feedback and I'll ponder that for a bit? I don't know that I have a excellent response to fire off to you right now.
For what it's worth, a conversation about a very similar topic recently happened between myself, Forrest, Natalie, and Emily in the CNB Slack. I can fish out the link to that somewhere, where really the conclusion of the conversation was that, to your point, Stephen, maybe it's not great to assume that layers will be in /layers, etc. But it seems like right now there's a gap in the spec where it sort of strongly implies that that will be the case, but doesn't actually require those things to be the same. And the same goes for /workspace, which is, I think, opening up a whole other can of worms, obviously, but it does kind of touch on the topic of this RFC.
Makes sense. It could be safe to use the absolute paths in that case then.
I was going to add the question, about workspace and CNB appdir and how that ties into working dir as far as the OCI spec is concerned. I believe there was a conversation, I don't know if there was an RFC to update the spec to make those match. In this particular case, is there any impact to that? Say, for instance, if you only have one process, it's the default one, it has a very different working directory, directory set. Should that apply to the working directory set on the OCI image?
I believe it should still apply to the directory structure on the OCI image. I think that maybe I've misunderstood your question, but I think that there's a link between the layer structure that we use when we're building and the final running structure. Like those two working directories are identical because the exporter writes it out such that the launcher makes the working directory that was used during build be the same working directory that was used during launch. Is that sort of what you're worried about, or?
I guess I'm hoping the answer is no, right? But if you had one default process type, and let's say in this particular example, directory is set to either a relative path or a different absolute path, and you have CNB appdir equals some value, would the OCI config working directory be the CNB appdir value or the value of the individual process type?
That I do not know.
Okay. So then I think I would add it on here as a suggested change just to be explicit that it shouldn't impact that if there's no preference from your side.
No preference from my side at all.
Cool.
Actually want to take back my feedback from a minute ago about the absolute paths. I think because a Buildpack has access to that layer path during build time and knows that it won't change, it could just derive those absolute paths accurately, regardless of what the directories are, and put them in there. So I don't think that's as big of a concern as what I brought up. The relative path is just for convenience, so you don't have to embed the app directory that the Buildpack knows about into it. Cool. Any more feedback for Forrest?
Yeah, I was just curious, like, are there very specific use cases besides, or is this mostly just for convenience that you're looking for?
The very specific use case that made me write this RFC was currently in Paketo. We are adding directives to allow, like this is a Node.js build pack. We're allowing directives for users to specify a project path that is not necessarily their working directory. So say you had static files, but you also had a Node app and you wanted to push into that Node app. Currently, what we have to do is we have to change directory and then run the sort of same nodes start or npm start that we would run, but that felt a little janky. So I thought I would come all the way up here and see if this was something that was interesting to y'all.
For what it's worth, actually, we have that same problem in the GCP build packs with using the functions framework. So I hadn't clued into that, but this would be very helpful.
Yeah, it would be great just either in the RFC or just on the PR itself to just probably get links to those use cases, just because I think that just helps with context.
Sure thing. I'll try and find some links to PRs and whatnot.
I don't want to speak for Emily because she's not here, but I was recently reading a conversation in Slack where she mentioned just a concern around setting the working directory that might be interesting to bring up, like build packs that are working together. So one build pack sets an environment variable to a relative path, and then the other build pack changes the working directory, could produce problems. Is there any concern about that?
So there's a difference between changing the working directory at build time versus changing the working directory for the runtime process. Was that I could see that happening in both contexts, but it seems like it's a really big concern like in the build time context where the environment could change. Do you know if she was concerned about one or either or both of those? I'm just curious.
I think actually, so yeah, this was about the location of the workspace at build time.
And Forrest, just to make sure, this is just about runtime, right? For what you're proposing, just about where the process type starts. Yes. I think that feedback is interesting though, because if you set a launch time environment variable that assumed the path, and applied to a different process that then changed the path, it kind of implies the Buildpack author shouldn't be setting runtime environment variables with relative paths. I don't know how common that is. I kind of wouldn't expect it to happen, but it's probably something to note in the RFC that could still cause a problem, even in the runtime case.
Arguably, those relative path environment variables would still run into problems in the case that a build pack process like CDs into somewhere and then does stuff, I think, if I'm understanding your point correctly.
Exactly. So I don't think it's as big of an issue as the build time issue, because things would have to be just right in order for that to work in the first place.
Would it affect the working directory for profile scripts?
It's a good question. I hadn't thought about that. I don't think it should. So maybe I should specify that it shouldn't. Really what I would want this for is, just I need to, before I execute this command, I need to be in this directory. So I don't know why it would affect that, but I should call that out.
You could say the same question for environment variables. Is that a concern with we have like dot append and all of that? Is there any way that could, it's like you could append to PWD or something, I guess. I don't know.
Aren't those all defined inside the, I guess.
But they get added to the environment at runtime.
Yeah, it's difficult.
I guess it probably doesn't matter unless somebody explicitly says, yeah, it might not be any problem there. Trying to think about other edge cases. All right, any additional feedback for Forrest? Then let's move to our last thing on the agenda, RFC contributor graph from Anthony. Anthony, you're muted.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So the idea is basically to put a contributor graph, right? I think GitHub has these, but they're on a per repo basis. The idea is something a little bit more ambitious, right? The idea is just you want to see the activity within the Buildpacks project in some public way. And, I'm thinking the big use cases for people who aren't quite invested yet, right? Like then maybe they're not attending the working groups, they're not in the Slack channel yet, right? But you still want a sense, maybe like a quick overview of just sort of what's happening. And I did put some ideas here as far as what activity looks like, right? And to me it's maybe like the RFC to issue to ship process. And hopefully if you have this in a graph and with metrics associated and things like that, you can iterate on it, optimize it, whatnot. I did take the time to make a nice little diagram here just to facilitate my thoughts a little bit, but that doesn't mean I'm adamant about anything in here. I just really wanted conversations around sort of what I was thinking, right? Here we have the different repos spit it out, and then we have data points indicating an RFC or an issue and sort of the time it takes to get to each one. And if you're a contributor, it might be nice to see your little face up here and your company getting represented. But that's in a nutshell. I thought it'd be good in the community section, but curious other thoughts.
Love it.
Could you speak a little bit to the motivation for this?
Yeah, I can. Like I said, I think I want to say that there are other people invested in Buildpacks as a whole, or any OSS project as a whole, but it's really hard to get a sense of that stuff without being in touch, right? And being in touch, like I said, means being in a working group and being in the Slack and things like that, right? So does that explain or something more specific?
So if we're adding this to the community page, right, is it more or less to depict the ongoing efforts and contributions by the contributors so that people want to contribute? Is that more, one of the goals? Or is it maybe in the same vein, like project health type thing that we're trying to relay?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't really think it has to have a single function, right? Like, I was thinking it could be public because, other people might be invested in it, right? Like other people might get benefit out of it, right? Other people might maybe be encouraged to contribute, let's say, if they see something like this. But, that's the only reason to make something like this public, right? But it doesn't need to be.
Yeah, I definitely don't think I'm arguing the public side of things, right? I guess more or less I'm trying to figure out exactly what we're trying to gain from this. For some context, I think I've seen at least two other things. There's the dev stats that the CNCF project provides, which is a whole bunch of data, right? All public data that you could see about the project with a lot of data points. And again, how you consume it is very different. And then I think I haven't seen it, but I know it exists, that there's like a Pacato dashboard that talks about or tries to portray the project health and stuff like that. And I guess maybe that's where my questions are coming from, right? Is whether or not we're trying to do something very similar, whether we should be leveraging some tools that we already have, and other thoughts like that.
Okay. Well, when you're talking about project health and things like that, I'm going to lean on y'all to let me know if that's a priority or whatnot. But I'm really not thinking too far down that lane yet, right? Like this is really just about insights, right? This is really just about insight at the first level, right? If it turns out that, let's say, the issue to shipped line is really, really long for some reason, there's a blocker there, maybe that's an indicator of a part of the process that could be optimized. But like, again, that's not my intention, right? For to keep, especially to put it public like that, right?
I have some thoughts about the fact that we see like the contributor's name and the company's name. I'm wondering, since we're an open source and we're trying to get like new contributors from any company or like individuals that would like to contribute to our project, I'm wondering what a new contributor, whether they'll see it and what their thoughts will be. Because probably most of these dots will be related to the same people that are around, from VMware, from Heroku, from, the other people that are here, like in this working group. And I'm wondering if a new contributor shows up, whether this will encourage them to start contributing, or they'll just say, okay, there are too many people out there, I'll take a step back. I'm not sure. Just some thoughts around this.
I think it's a good point. I'm also worried about that. That's why I brought this to working group. I really am more interested in how everybody else feels it, right? Like I think showing people's affiliations like that could be a drawback. It could deter people. It could encourage people. I don't know enough yet to be on either side of the fence there. So that's why I put it as a drawback. Maybe we want to consider. Maybe we can leave this information out. I hope I'm getting to the qualm you're expounding there.
I think this is pretty cool. Thanks for putting this together. I I'd probably share some of the questions I think that Javier had originally, just like what is the motivation? Because I think there's a lot of information here. So just trying to figure out, I guess, the use cases or problems not use cases isn't the right word, like kind of the problems you're trying to solve exactly. Because I think, yeah, you're pulling from a lot of kind of different data points. So I think you've said like you don't want to solve health, for instance. And so it sounds like you're trying to show, I feel like, just contributor activity to, I guess, like, are you trying to inspire and get people more involved in the project because they see how active the project is? And maybe also the flip side of that is like feeling a moment of pride because if you are a contributor, you get to see your name or something somewhere kind of on here. But maybe I'm extrapolating.
No, it's good thoughts. Listen, I won't say I know enough about contributor motivations to make that point. Like, I really just want to say it's really about insight into the project, and that's where it's at. Like, health and insight doesn't have to be health right away, right? Like it's really just about what are the different parties, so that people can have a like discussion around it, something like that. Like maybe it turns into a health conversation, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just, how does this compare to last month, XYZ. But like it's really hard to even know how to start this conversation without a uniform understanding of the project.
One thing that I really like about this mockup is that it adds some sort of like narrative, I guess, to understanding like how technology comes into existence inside of this project. Like perhaps this is like so obvious to everyone in this working group because RFCs are sort of the name of the game, but seeing like, okay, on the left, like an idea starts as an RFC and then it stays that way for a while and then becomes an issue and then it's shipped, like even that as a piece of information for a brand newcomer to the project to kind of get a sense of like what is currently happening inside of the project, what are like the narrative streams or like work streams in a way that's consumable, that's not just reading a governance document and reading a contributor document and following a bunch of links in GitHub. So I think in that sense, it does create a sort of jumping off point for someone to understand what next questions they could ask to get interested in specific work streams.
I think it's neat just to have more transparency. So anything that adds transparency, I think, is good. And I think there's very limited risks in more transparency.
So first, I want to say, Frankie, I think your feedback was really well worded. I think that part of it is probably missing, and this does help it. I think it definitely adds a little bit of complexity to the implementation, right? Like how do you link the progress of an idea all the way to being shipped, right? Like, because it goes through multiple issues. It's not just one issue, right? Like one RFC could end up with so many different issues and so forth. So there's one thing. And then I guess the other part, maybe Anthony, going to your piece and Patrick, yours as well. I do wonder if this is like the right way to project the data, right? Like, because again, we already have dev stats, right? And like I said, there's a ton of information. So if we're really trying to answer the, being public about the information and even, how to consume that information, I think DevStat does really, really well for the, that aspect of it. So I think what I like to see on the community side of things would be more or less maybe to what Terrence was aiming for, right? Something that is there to more or less entice contributors to be part of the community. That's my feedback. And I see that we're at time, so.